Okay, there we go. Okay, so again, we're going to go over first the administrative functions in InfoNet. The first one I'm going to take you to, and again, you want to click this settings symbol that looks like a round gear, is center information. You probably won't need to go here very often. It is just basic organization about your center, address, contact person's email address, contact information. And you'll probably only need to go here once. Unless you move, then you'd want to update it. Okay, so not too much there, but I did want to show you that page. Next is the personnel information page. So a common question we get at InfoNet Help is, hey, I am trying to enter a service that I provided to my client, but I don't see my name in the staff drop-down menu. Can somebody add it for me? This is actually something you can do from your end. This is a permanent record of all your current and former staff. So anybody that's ever worked at your organization will be in here. If you want to add a new staff, you just click add new personnel. I'm going to add my fake staff person. Personnel type is simply if they do or do not provide direct service, or if they're a board member. You want to enter their start date. I'm going to make my start date a little earlier at January 1st, 2024. So I have some time to enter services. Termination date is only entered when this person stops working or volunteering for your organization. And speaking of volunteers, so by default, whenever you add a new personnel, it's going to have paid staff checked. But if this person is an intern or an unpaid volunteer, you want to make sure you check the volunteer button. And there's just a slight difference with a volunteer record. One additional field where you enter that person's supervisor. I'm going to pretend my personnel is a paid staff. All these fields are optional. I'm going to leave them blank. Gender and race. Some providers want that because it's sometimes helpful to look at the demographics of your staff and see how closely they resemble your client pool. So I'm going to save my staff person. Whoops, I didn't spell that correctly. And now I have added Romeo as my new staff person. I can look this person up, whoops, by using any of these search fields. There's the staff I just added. You can also search for staff. If I only want a list of active staff, I can change status to active and click search so I can see all my active staff. So there's different ways you can search among your personnel records. Another common question is, if you look at your staff volunteer drop-down menus throughout InfoNet, you may see names on there of people who no longer work for your organization. And you're wondering, how do I get those off of the drop-down menu? And I'll show you an example. I'm just going to go to another page where this field is available. So community services. If I add a new service and I click the staff volunteer drop-down menu, I'm going to see my Romeo that I just added. But let's say Jeanette left the agency a long time ago. How do I remove her name from this drop-down menu? I'm going to go over to my personnel information. I'm going to look at her record. Supervisor is the one I was looking at specifically. I'm going to edit, and I'm going to enter a termination date. And ideally, you want to know the last day they worked for the termination date. But if you just know that they've left the agency, and maybe it was a couple years ago, you can put an estimate date here. So if I know that this person left in 2018, I'm just going to use the last day of 2018. And then I'm going to save. And now if I go back to one of my staff drop-down menus, I will see that her name has now been removed. So personnel information is one of those administrative functions that's going to help you keep your staff volunteer drop-down menus up to date, and be able to edit information on both your paid staff and your volunteers. The next administrative feature available here is funding for staff. Now, there is a whole 2-hour training on funding for staff. If you're interested, I have a recorded video for that. But I want to at least kind of show you what it is, what it does, and give you a summary of how it works. This is the feature in InfoNet that allows you to run reports that isolate grant-funded activities. Different funders are different. So if you receive a grant from DHS, they do not require grant-specific information. So in return for receiving a grant from DHS, that you would just give them a report that includes all the clients and all the services your entire program provided. ICEJA, ICASA, those funders have grants that require grant-specific data. So if you receive a VOCA grant from ICASA, in return for receiving that VOCA grant, ICASA is going to run a report that shows not what your entire agency did, but only what clients were served and services provided with those grant dollars, those specific VOCA grant dollars. And InfoNet knows how to isolate that information using this funding for staff tool. So in this example, so when I go to the funding for staff page, it's always going to take me to the most recent statement date. In this case, it's August 1st, 2023. If I click this drop-down menu here, I can view earlier funding dates because funding changes over time. You have turnover, you may decide to take somebody's funding sources and shift them. That's when you'd want to add a new funding date. But in this example, this means as of August 1st, 2023, and the staff I have selected here is Stephanie Cartwright, but I can move to a different staff. I'm going to click on myself and see what's there. Okay, so this is saying Jennifer Heiselman provides 5 services. There's 4 different types of counseling. And then I also work on the hotline. So I'm listed as anonymous crisis intervention. Each here on the right side, it's showing that all 5 of my services are 100% funding with something, which is what it should be. And if I click any one of these services, this is family counseling. This is telling InfoNet for every hour of family counseling service that Jennifer provides, funding source A is going to pay for half of that hour, and funding source B is going to pay for the other half of that hour. So that's how it calculates your grant-specific data. And you can run reports in funding for staff. There are 4 reports you can run right here from the page. If I click selected funding, that's going to give me an overall view of all the staff that are on my August 1st funding statement. And I can see I have several staff. It shows me all the services they provide and which grant pays for their service. So with Stephanie, it looks like the DHS grant pays for her coalition building and community mobilization services, while the VOCA grant pays for her in-person and phone counseling service. Okay, so the last administrative function under the settings button here are your lists, and there are 3 of them: agencies, funding sources, and other staff activities. I'm going to go over the agencies one, and then I'll just explain how the other two or their purpose, because they all work the same way. All of these lists are locally defined by your organization. So a rape crisis center in Chicago, their organization is going to have an entire different list of agencies than a rape crisis center down in Southern Illinois. So I'm going to click on agencies. And this is a list of all the agencies in my agency drop-down menu. And you can see these agency drop-down menus when you're entering client referral source, or if you're providing community services, you might provide them at a certain school, you would see the school in your agency list. And this is how you can add new agencies, remove agencies, or edit agencies that you have already in your lists. So in other words, this list here links to, I'm going to open community services again so you can see. Here is an agency field. When I click this drop-down menu, all the options I see here are tied to that agency lookup list. So if I want to add something to this drop-down menu, remove or change, I need to go here. Manage my list, agencies. And I'm going to add, I recommend if you're adding an agency, skim through the agencies you have and make sure it's not already there. It shows 10 records at a time by default, but you can expand that up to 100. So if you don't scan, you could end up with situations like where you have two agencies that are really the same, they're just spelled in a slightly different way. I don't see any examples here, but let's go to the second page. Okay, so let's say these two are the same organization. We have Sherman Hospital and Sherman. And if I go to my agency drop-down menu, I'm going to see both of those, but I know they're the same place. So I shouldn't have two different entries. What I can try doing first is deleting the agency. So I'm going to try deleting Sherman. And then I'm going to click save. It's asking me if I'm sure I want to delete. I'm going to click yes. And if you have any records tied to this particular agency, it's not going to let me delete it. And that's what's happened in this case. If there are no records, it will delete it for you. So in my case, it's not able to delete because somebody has entered some past records that are linked to this Sherman agency I tried to delete. So the next best thing I can do, I'm going to go down to that agency again. Instead of deleting it, I'm going to edit it and I'm going to uncheck. This is the is active box. It's checked by default or active. I can simply uncheck it and then save. It might be a little slow if we're all on here. And now if I go to my agency drop-down menu, I'm going to go to community services again. And if I click on my agency drop-down menu, we'll see that Sherman should be removed. Okay, so I do see Sherman Hospital, but I no longer see Sherman. So maybe I have older records tied to that, but at least this stops anybody else from entering under that agency name. And to add a new agency, I simply want to type it here. But again, you want to kind of skim through your existing list to make sure that somebody else or you don't have that organization already entered as a different name. So I'm going to enter the network. This is important to complete if you're providing prevention services with this agency. So indicate if they're a prevention partner or not. And if they are, you're also going to want to check what type of organization or sector they are in. Display order, I usually leave that blank. If it's blank, it just means all your agencies are going to display in alphabetical order. If there's a specific agency that you always want at the top of the drop-down menu, even if it's out of alphabetization, you can make the display order a lower number. It will display the lowest number first and then work its way up. So I'm going to add this agency. And now if I go to a drop-down menu for agency again, I should see it. Okay, and there it is, the network. So that's how you can control this drop-down menu. The other two lists are funding sources, which can be useful if you get a new, perhaps a local grant that's not a statewide grant like ICASA or DHS. Maybe you receive a mental health grant from your local county board. I could add DuPage County Mental Health Board. If the grant has an end date, it's helpful to put that in there. That will prevent mistakes down the road. I'll say this is ending 6/30/25. I'm going to leave display order blank again. And now I can add, if that grant allows me to pay staff time, I can link staff to that specific grant in my funding statements. The last locally defined list is other staff activities. And this is just an area in InfoNet that allows you to track different types of activities you want to track that are not already predefined in InfoNet. Some examples that I see it used for are maybe strategic planning, trainings that you're receiving, because there is nothing like that to track in InfoNet. It tracks trainings you provide, but it doesn't track trainings you receive like this very moment. So if you wanted to track things like that, some people like to track entering data, time they spend entering data into InfoNet. Fundraising is another way I've seen other staff activities used. You can basically use it to track any type of activity you think is helpful for your organization to track. And your other staff activity list is tied to this page. If I click services, other staff activities, I can add an activity. And when I click this drop-down menu, it is going to correspond to my other staff activity lookup list, which I'll go over the data entry piece later, but I wanted to show you how to manage this field on your own. The last lists that you will want to manage are in prevention, but because they're only relevant to prevention services, the buttons to manage those lists are here. You have your strategy tags and your coalition names. And this is the same as your agency lookup list I demonstrated a few moments ago, manage agency partners. This is just another way to get there. Okay, so that concludes the session on your administrative functions.